deep inside that tells me that my place is here. Too long I fought myself.
Kirsten Kingdon. I'm the Executive Director of PFLAG, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And one of the things I am most proud of PFLAG about is how trans-inclusive it has become over the course of the time I've been involved, the last 4 or 5 years. I think a great deal of that is due to the wonderful educational efforts of the Transgender Network within PFLAG, the leadership and voice of parents like Mary Boenke and many others who are involved in that network, who have helped those of us who are parents of gay children see that the issues and the concerns that parents of trans children have is very much the same as those that parents of gay and lesbian and bisexual children have. PFLAG's Transgender Network has, among other things, compiled an impressive array of educational materials which are very, very useful and which are available at very low cost to anyone who is interested. And it's very heartwarming to me to get inquiries from chapter leaders around the country asking for information so that they can educate themselves and their communities better, and being so very appreciative of the materials that have been developed by that the Transgender Network. So I would say this has actually been one of the exciting things about my last few years as Executive Director of PFLAG.
We're Pat and Lynn Milligan, and we're members of PFLAG's Transgender Network. We're here today to help you understand what it means to be transgender.
We have a transgendered son, and like all individuals, each transgendered person is different. Some choose to come out, some choose to be very private individuals, and some you will know and some you won't know.
I was born in 1948 in Oakland, California, and when I was just before my 40th birthday, I started transition into male form. I think that a lot of people don't understand, how it is that someone can come to the decision to transition. Basically, for me, my gender was always masculine. That I always felt, even though people kept telling me I was a girl and I knew I had a female body, I simply could not be female. I knew I was not going to grow up to be a woman.
I'm Jessica Xavier. I'm a male to female transsexual woman. I gender transitioned 9 years ago and had my surgery 7 years ago. It's been said of transsexualism that you don't choose it, it chooses you, and that was most definitely my case. I mean, you don't really wake up in the middle of your life and suddenly decide to reinvent yourself, spending tens of thousands of dollars, abandoning a perfectly good male identity with all of its vested privilege, and then have to turn around and unlearn all of these old behaviors, relearning new social roles, while undergoing a second hormonally induced adolescence, all the while facing nearly universal disapproval and discrimination. That's not a choice. That's something that chooses you.
I no longer buy into a binary or bipolar gender system where it's just male and female. I believe that gender is expressed along a continuum, and that people express their gender based on their upbringing, their experiences in life, their natural talents and intellectual gifts, and so forth. And just because one is born in the body of a woman or the body of a man should in no way limit their human potential, and that they should express who they are and how they feel in a way that's comfortable for them, regardless of societal constraints.
I've had to deal with bias for the first time in my life. I grew up as a hetero white male in a privileged class in our society, and now I'm a middle-aged woman who happens to be a transsexual woman. And so, as one of my therapists said, sweetheart, you did not trade up, economically or socially. And so I've had to deal with that for the first time, walking down the street, with those stares and those glances every once in a while when people, read that I used to be a male or used to appear as a male, and I'd never faced that before. My skin color has been the acceptable skin color. My religion, my status in society is such that I didn't have to deal with that, and so it's been a big switch for me. When I had to deal with my employment last year, I'm a high school teacher in a very successful program in California. I had to tell my employer, my principal, because when I came back in the fall, I was going to start living my life as Dana, and people were going to notice the change. I was a pretty butch, masculine guy, and so he was okay. My students were okay. The parents were okay in the community, but a couple of very religious, very conservative people were on the school board, and they saw this as a moral issue and moved to dismiss me, and that caused a national furor, media calls from all over the country, and I chose, rather than to be silent, to answer those calls and to tell my story at a national media level, and it simply changed my life. I have become an activist. I'm not teaching. I just recently earned back my credential. It was put on hold while the state reviewed it. They consider whether or not I was still fit to be a teacher after all the publicity and what happened to me.
There are people who identify as transsexual who will not ever change their bodies, but they feel completely as members of the opposite sex. So they may be transgendered, but they also identify as transsexual. Transsexual is a medical term that has been imposed on us from the outside. It's not a term that all of us accept. All of us don't accept transgender either. So and the definition for transgender can change based on who you talk to. But this is the most common usage. Transvestites are people who just wear the clothing of the opposite sex. And that's often, transvestite is a clinical term, actually. It's a psychological clinical term that describes a condition of pretty much unhappiness with the fact that you are compulsive about wearing clothing of the opposite sex. Now, there are lots of people who wear the clothing of the opposite sex. They don't feel compulsive about it. They're not unhappy about it. They don't like to be called transvestites because of that medicalized connotation, so they prefer the term cross-dresser. And then, of course, there's drag queens and drag kings, and that's not medicalized at all. That's performance and entertainment.
Well, it's difficult for me to pin one particular etiology on transsexualism. I think there has to be some sort of a natural predisposition somehow. Maybe it's a spontaneous genetic mutation some people have attributed homosexuality to. But I'm uncomfortable with all of the natural definitions of it because that also doesn't allow for other transgendered people who consciously choose to transgress gender norms as part of who they are. And I think very much that gender expression is a human right, and it should be made that way. And I think eventually, through the work of all the wonderful activists who are doing this type of educational stuff, that we'll come to realize just that.
My name is Dawn Josephine Wilson. I'm an activist in Kentucky. That's Lexington and Louisville, which are the two largest cities. I have been out for more than 7 years. I'm a decorated officer in the military. I've been gone from there for many years. I'm also a graduate of the University of Kentucky and Transylvania University. I founded two groups, one called BGB, and also worked with the Fairness Campaign, which is the campaign that helps gay, lesbian, bi, and trans people served rights. Recently we passed two sets of rights. We passed rights in Lexington, Louisville, and Henderson. And we recently defeated a state initiative to get rid of any protections for gay, lesbian, bi, or trans people. When people first see me, when they first hear me speak, they go, well, wait a minute, are you a woman? Or you're not a man, that's sure, but why are you here? You're not a lesbian, you're not bi? And I have to explain to them, I'm a transsexual. I am somebody who many of you all have vilified by using Dennis Rodman Rodman don't represent me. They have used Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes don't represent me. I represent me. I am an African American transgendered female.
Hi, my name is Hale, and when I was born in the early 1960s, the doctors weren't sure whether I was a boy or a girl. And what the doctors told my parents was that given the fact that my genitals were extremely small, that it would be impossible for me to be raised as a boy, and that they would have to do surgery in order to change my body so that I would look like a girl, and then they would send me home and basically raise me as a girl. My parents didn't think that this was necessary, and they basically talked to the doctors and they wanted to know more about why the doctors felt that this was required, because what they saw was a boy with a small penis. My parents eventually did just say, we're not going to do this, and they took me home and raised me as a boy. These are the current medical standards that doctors use to determine whether or not surgery is required on an intersexed infant. If a baby is born with a phallus that is 3/8 of an inch or less, then the doctors say that baby is a girl. If the phallus is longer than an inch when it is stretched, then you fall in this zone of being a boy. In between this area is the forbidden zone. And if your phallus happens to be that long when you were born, then you are a candidate for surgery. And as a matter of fact, doctors still today require that surgery be performed on infants when their phalluses are within this range. And these surgeries often have devastating impact on the child later on in their life. We're not saying that you don't assign that baby one sex or the other. You probably make an assignment based on what makes the most sense. If it looks more like a boy, you send him home and tell the parents that it's a boy. And if it looks more like a girl, you send him home and tell the parents that it's a girl. But you also tell the parents that it's conditional, that later on in life that baby may decide that he or she is really something else. But here's the funny thing, it's always conditional. When you send a baby home, and you may think very well that that baby is a boy or a girl, at some point that baby may decide that he or she is actually something else. And we should be open to allowing people to make those changes in their lives and to decide for themselves what they really are.
I started a support group 2 years ago for parents of young children who were concerned about their children's interest in opposite sex toys, clothing, and activities. The children in our group are all boys, although I do get calls from mothers of girls concerned about the same thing. The children have a sense of what is expected of them in terms of being a boy or a girl or liking boy and girl things from a very, very early age. And when they discover that their interests are not the way they're supposed to be, then parents get very alarmed and kids also get confused about what that means.
I'm Florence. I'm the mother of two wonderful sons. My second son was born with a girl's body. So I didn't know I had two sons until he was 3 and told me so. And the reason I believe he's a son is because he has continued to tell me so consistently and insistently since that time. He is now almost 13, is living very, very happily as a boy, is attending school as a boy, is in every way a joyous, confident, carefree child, and always knew who he was. It took me several years to come to terms with understanding that he did know who he was and to support him. The thing that was hardest for me was probably the ages between 4 and 6, when my child was trying very, very hard to help us understand that he was indeed a boy, even though he knew he had a girl's body. He couldn't explain or understand why he had this body, and it was troubling to him. I was assuming that somehow, despite all of my attempts to let this child know that I was so happy to have a baby girl, and that girls could grow up to be anything they wanted to be, and there were no limits whatsoever on what it meant to be a woman, that wasn't what my child needed to hear. Because my child needed to hear that it was okay that he was a boy, and that I loved him even though he was a boy, and I didn't only love him because I thought he was a girl. On the 3rd birthday, Sarah was opening a present from one of the grandmothers, and it was a typical kind of grandmother present, a beautiful pink dress with lots of ribbons and laces and bows. It was the sort of thing that I knew Sarah would never want to wear, because Sarah was a very active, outdoorsy, playful kind of kid, and it wasn't the sort of thing that you could wear living that sort of a life. But I was surprised at her reaction, because when Sarah saw the present, she looked up and asked, "Why is Grandma giving me a dress? Doesn't she know I'm not the sort of girl who wears dresses?" And then in a few minutes, she came back and said, "Just tell Grandma I'm a boy."
I think the important thing about this is to know that these kids from a very early age feel different, many times are very distressed. Their parents become gender cops trying to get their kids to conform. As if they're trans people, again, it is even more difficult to understand whether you are a boy or a girl.
Sarah didn't seem to understand why we didn't know that she was a boy. And as he got older, between 4 and 6, he became very sad. Whenever we were in public, he would insist on us using male pronouns when we referred to him. He was him. I would get pinched, I would get kicked if I used the wrong pronouns. I stopped using pronouns altogether around this child. While I was trying very hard to help this child feel good about herself, come to terms with being a girl, I was, of course, making him feel that I didn't see him, and I didn't appreciate who he was, and I didn't love and accept him. He finally came to me at age 6 and said, "Mommy, I know there's nothing a boy can do that a girl can't do, but I'm a boy." And shortly after that, he came to me in tears and said, "Mommy, you only like girls." And that's when I heard him.
We understand now, even though all of the information is not in, we do understand that kids are born this way, that they are not created this way by their environment. People have been looking at environments for years. We have never determined anything about an environment that would influence whether a person wanted to be a boy or a girl, or straight or gay. And even though we can't say definitely that we understand that a gene exists or something that exists in a prenatal experience that would create a person who is attracted to the opposite sex or does not feel comfortable in the gender of their bodies, we do know that there is nothing in the environment that anybody has discovered, and believe me, they have tried for years to discover what it could be that parents are doing wrong. Parents do nothing wrong because there is nothing wrong.
We in PFLAG say that when our children come out of the closet, the parents go into the closet. And for families of transgender children, it's even harder. In our case, when our son came out, who at the time was really our daughter. She was recently married and 20, and called up home and said, I'm not feeling too good and I'm seeing a therapist. And when I asked what for, she said, for gender dysphoria. And I knew what each word meant separately, but I didn't know what it meant together. And that was 12 years ago. And it's a slow road. At first, you feel very much that this has been done to you. Then you realize that it's really a family thing to work through. And as you see your child develop self-confidence and become comfortable, you start to get comfortable.
I'm Bob.
And I'm Karen, and we're the parents of a transgender child who came out to us at about age 24. And this was something we had never heard about before, and thought that our child and Renee Richards and Christine Jorgensen were the only 3 people in the world like this. And we didn't know what to do. We thought we were going to be losing our child. We thought that that the world would cave in on us. And the first thing I needed to do when I found out about this was to find out what was happening. And as I found out what was happening and thought more about my child's past, I realized that there were hints all along the way. I just didn't recognize what I was finding and seeing and hearing. And then I went to a therapist because I felt I needed help dealing with this. And it turned out that I was educating the therapist and paying for the privilege. And so I decided I didn't need to go to a therapist anymore. And then I met Mary Boenke, and through Mary Boenke, we began talking to PFLAG groups, and soon I became what I consider, and I guess many folks consider, an expert on the subject. And we began talking to universities, schools, health professionals, and any other people that wanted to hear our story and learn about what it meant to have a transsexual child.
When our child came out to us, at first I was in denial. I thought it was a phase that she was going through. But it soon became apparent that what he said was the way it was going to be. He said, Mom and Dad, I'm taking hormones. I will be changing my persona. My voice will deepen. Facial hair will come in. Please use male pronouns. And told us his new name. Mitch went from chronically depressed to very undepressed, a little bit more outgoing, developing a sense of humor that he never had before. We've told people who have had to know, and we haven't told people who we felt didn't need to know. And we've always tried to tell them in person. And one of our great delights is the way that our parents took Mitch's transition. We found that the family took their cue from how we accepted our child. When they saw that we didn't think twice about it, they didn't give it any thought.
For instance, coming out to parents is a very difficult process. And parents often, not every parent, but some parents will say, oh, I wish you'd told me you were gay instead of telling me you were supposed to be a man or supposed to be a woman. It's interesting that that would be their response, because to be gay was a bad thing for so many years. But here parents say, oh, I wish you would have said you were gay, because I could have taken that better than hearing that you should have been a man or a woman.
We became involved in transgender issues and with people when our own daughter came out to us a second time as a transsexual person. She had come out after her freshman year of college as a lesbian, 20-some years ago, and again 5 years ago as a transsexual, and we now have a wonderful new son. We think that he's happier now than he's ever been before, that he's more successful with his work, more together, more assertive, and we feel it was a necessary transition for him to make. I was a working mother, and we went through some of the stages of grief that you will hear about. particularly guilt. I thought, oh, maybe if I'd stayed home and been with him more, we could have avoided some of these hardships for him.
But back in those early days, we didn't know much about the situation, and we felt that because of that, we did not understand it, and we thought, oh, it must have been something we did wrong in raising this child, that something, it was our guilt. We said, we did something wrong.
John was a very attentive father, but I was a working mother, and I often felt I wished I had more time for the children. Some parents go through another stage called bargaining. That is, if you do this, I'll do that, and so forth. Dying people are often bargaining with God, but I think we often said to our kid, both when she came out as a lesbian and later when he came out as a transsexual, that we accept you and we love you, just don't bring your friends around, we're not ready for that yet. So we went through a little stage like that. And then finally, acceptance, where we think he's just fine, just the way he is.
The fact that we understood things and accepted our child made it easier for our relatives also to accept him, and in fact bring his partner, when he was a lesbian, to a family gathering, and now as a transsexual is still a very important part of the greater family.
For me, the most healing, expressive thing that I could do was to turn to my art, because in truth I had no words for what I was dealing with. 12 years ago, when our son started this journey, we only knew of 2 other transgendered individuals, and there were no books, there were no support groups, and most people were clueless as to what I was saying. So I turned to my art, and the early images centered on my feeling of disbelief, anger. I really was angry that this was happening, that I had to deal with this. It was not something I raised my hand for. And profound sadness. I really just felt that my child was going to be ripped from me. And one of the images in the picture is very blurred and fading out. And my fear, I remember saying to a person, my fear is that I will forget my child. There comes a time when you start to realize that it's still your child. It is still your child, and even if you're angry at this child, even if you wish the situation to go away, this is your child, and it's the same child you've always loved. And whether people point and make fun of this child, it is that little child, and even if he's an adult, he is still that little child.
The one thing which I've never had a problem with is I've noticed that my father has not left me. My father has a different shape and a different name, but the person there that has always helped me, that is able to, though now with some disparity, get under the car and get greasy. My
nails.
The person hasn't gone away. My father has not left me at all. And I refer to and think of Dana now as Dana and my parent rather than Dad. But I haven't lost anybody. Nobody's gone anywhere.
My name is Kit. This is my daughter Sam. I'm a female-to-male transsexual. I transitioned 8 years ago. And I'm one of those people that I might look like a dad, but I'm really a mom. I'll always be a mom. Sometimes not in public. One of the things when I began transition I told Samantha was you might have to be careful eventually, because if you yell out mom in the store and you know, people look at you and they'll look at me and they're going to think this poor child has really got a problem going on here. For the most part, I think Sam's dealt well with all the changes that we've gone through together. I hope she has. This may have been the most selfish thing in the world that I did, but I had to do it. I would have waited if I felt I had to, but I think she dealt with it pretty well. As time went on, I realized, okay, well, I'm something else, but there's nothing I can do about it. You hear about Renee Richards and Carolyn Cossey and you know, going back to all the highlighted men who become women, but you don't hear about women who become men. Later on, as I discovered more about myself and found out what was going on, and realized I was transgendered, there were other things that I could deal with. The fascinating thing was having my daughter. I am my daughter's biological mother, and that's about the only time in my life I ever felt happy with my female body. It was biologically the one thing it was apparently meant to do, and it did quite well.
I think the strangest thing is that it didn't really surprise me. It didn't seem like that much of a stretch. Even though I'd never really heard about it before, it just didn't seem odd. It was like, okay, sure. It just seemed like a normal course of events. I don't even really know why. Again, I guess it could go back to that idea of like, the first thing I remember my mom teaching me was how to change a tire and how to check oil instead of like, oh, let's bake cookies.
Most parents, when they love their children, they'll find a way of accepting and dealing with it. They may grieve the loss of, in my case, their daughter, and learn to accept a son. And for a very short period of time, I thought my folks were trying to do that. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out that way. And the only way they could actively fight me was through their only grandchild. Had I not had Samantha, I think they would have just written it off as me being, you know, some aberration of nature and, you know, never spoken to me again or whatever. And this isn't due to religious beliefs on their part. They just think that I'm just totally crazy.
Well, my family knew about my gender problems for some time, but I didn't act on them because I didn't want to hurt my parents. But ultimately, I couldn't stop being myself. When I did finally come out, I lost my whole family in transition. But eventually, my mother and my youngest brother came around, although my father and middle brother still do not speak to me. And I put myself in the perspective that this was something that just had to be. I'm saddened that they don't want to know me or have me in their lives, but that's their choice, not mine.
Well, my father had unfortunately passed away before I could come to grips with it, so that's one regret that I have, was that he wasn't around to see me do this. I think it would have been easier for my mother if he had been around, because he was sort of a moderating influence on her rigidity sometimes. Her immediate response was, "I forbid it." And I said, "Well, Mom, you know, I'm almost 40 years old. You can't do that." And basically, she sputtered and fumed, and then she says, "Well, don't tell your brother." And I said, "Yeah, Mom," as if he's not going to notice. And she said, "Well, he won't be able to take it." And I said, "Yeah, fine." And of course I went and told him immediately. And his response, and he's like Mr. Normal, Mr. Middle America, and his response was, "Well, if that's what you need to do to be happy, you always were my big brother anyway."
The pain of losing my family in gender transition brought me to PFLAG, because PFLAG is about families rediscovering their love for their loved ones who have different sexual orientations than the majority. And I found a group of people who are finding answers to all of those questions that arise when one of their loved ones, one of their family members, a son or a daughter, a spouse or a partner, comes out and says the words that no one really should ever expect to hear, that they're transgendered. And I think PFLAG is uniquely positioned to play a major role in educating the majority, as they have with gay, lesbian, and bisexual children and their families. because PFLAG has the resources, the understandings, the commitment, and also the love that marks PFLAGers everywhere to come forward, to stand in the light, to be proud of their children, be proud of ourselves, to be proud of the diversity that is our particular community, and to educate those who really need to hear this. Right now we're in a critical phase in the transgender movement because we are somewhat behind the gay and lesbian movement in terms of the public's understanding of us. So education right now plays a very key role. We need many, many more parents, families, friends, significant others, allies, and transgendered people themselves to come forward and to help educate the public, not just about who we are as transgendered and transsexual people, but also about gender itself. Gender-based oppression affects all of us, not just women, not just the sexual minorities, but all of us. And we need to get a better understanding of something that we so quickly take for granted. So I'm very committed toward moving that education forward. I have been a gender educator for the past 9 years. I find this work to be terribly fulfilling, but it's also a challenge to get people to own their own genders, something that they think, you know, is the same thing as their physical sex, and it's most definitely not.
I had enough money to be able to pay for what I needed. I spent $43,000 over 3 years. Some people will spend much, much more depending on the type of surgery that they elect, or depending on the complications that may arise in their surgery. And it can cost up to $150,000 just for genital reconstruction for female to male, depending on complications. With respect to actual transsexual treatments, hormones and surgery, every procedure that is done and every medication that is given to transsexual people is available to non-transsexual people and is covered for non-transsexual people. But if you're transsexual, all of a sudden you're excluded. Now, to me, that is completely based on bigotry and prejudice. And that needs to be changed. Because I was diagnosed with depression, which I wasn't actually getting therapy to deal with my gender issues. I'd already dealt with that, but I did go to a therapist who specialized in gender issues while I was going through transition because I was really depressed about my partner leaving me. So I was diagnosed with depression, and that was covered by my insurance. My hormone treatments have always been covered by my insurance because I've been diagnosed with hypotestosteronemia, which means I don't produce enough testosterone, which is true. Some people are able to get chest reconstruction paid for as either having it diagnosed as gynecomastia or as a breast reduction for health reasons. Genital reconstruction, although if I were a non-transsexual man and needed penis reconstruction, it would be available to me. As a transsexual man, it is not available to me, so I had to pay for that out of pocket. I also had to pay out of pocket for a hysterectomy because you had to have approval ahead of time, and they didn't think that I needed a hysterectomy because I was a man. So, and they don't pay for hysterectomies for men. So I paid for that myself, and then with pathology was present, so I petitioned and eventually got it paid for based on the fact that it was a diseased organ, and it would have needed to be removed regardless of what sex my body was. So they ultimately did reimburse me for the hysterectomy.
And the result has been wonderful personally, because since I started taking hormones and living in my appropriate gender role as a woman, I've never been happier. The feelings of suicide, which were just chronic before, have almost completely left me. And although I have a lot of stressors in my life, I've lost my job, I've lost my family, my home, I'm financially not nearly as secure as I used to be, I'm able to handle those things because I'm kind of healed from the inside out, which is the wonderful result of the therapy for this condition. And there's no doubt in my mind that A, I'm a transsexual woman, B, I suffered from a clinical condition, and B, C, there's a cure for it, and I'm undergoing it, and it works.
And with all these problems, people can ask, why would they do this? Why would they give up the life they have for some unknown? What is it that makes them so want to change their bodies to match what they feel inside?
One of our transgendered individuals helped us put together a booklet, and I'm going to read what that individual wrote about that very reason. In the booklet, Our Trans Children, he writes, "The desire to modify the body to conform to one's gender identity becomes a determined drive, a desperate search for relief and release. It is a need to match one's exterior with one's interior to achieve harmony of spirit and shape, of body and soul."
I've had a variety of experiences in my life, but I've been in private practice for about 6 years now. And when I started my practice, I decided to reach out to the trans community specifically because I knew that there weren't a lot of therapists out there that would accept them, that would understand that it's just who they are and we need to help them through this process. So I would say about 65% of my client load for the last 6-7 years have been trans people. In this area, in the Washington, D.C. area, there happens to be a very large trans community. So as a result, there are support groups. And what I've done is I've made myself available to the support groups. There's one group called Magic that meets every third Friday of the month. And at those Magic meetings, it's a group of people who are trans people who are going through the process. So I learned a lot from those meetings, going to those meetings, but also letting people know I was out there for them. So it was my way of reaching out to them and also being available to them to come and see me. That's how I did that. In small town America, it's a little bit harder to find a therapist who's understanding and compassionate and doesn't judge. As a matter of fact, I had a client who came to see me all the way from Roanoke, Virginia, because he just didn't know of anyone down in that area of Virginia, which is a little bit more conservative compared to Northern Virginia. And so he drove to see me once a week until he went through his process. Finding a therapist that's understanding and compassionate and not judging is a difficult process, but it can be done. The thing is, the person needs to be willing to be a little bit open about themselves. And this is a very difficult thing to be open about because for years they've hidden it. Even the self-acceptance hasn't been there. So how can you walk into a therapist's office and say, I think I should be a woman, or I think I should be a man, even though that's not what I show in my body? So there's a certain level of trust that has to be established, so people will get involved in therapy first, testing out their therapist before they even bring up the gender identity issue. Sometimes maybe it's not a testing out process, but just a process of learning to feel comfortable, even beginning to talk about it. But the initial thing is they need to feel comfortable with their therapist to begin with, because they can't even be open to themselves about this.
When our son came out to us as a transsexual, I was already active in PFLAG, and I knew the stages of grief that parents go through. So I could kind of catch myself when I heard another stage coming up. I would say, oh, dummy, that's denial, or that's bargaining. And I got through those emotional stages much more quickly the second time around. And a few weeks after we first heard this news, I was already planning to attend a PFLAG convention, went to a transgender workshop, and afterwards several of us got together and began what soon became a transgender network within PFLAG. We have had remarkable success, I think, in reaching people, in educating each other, developing educational materials for other people, and in urging PFLAG to become transgender inclusive. We feel that it's very important that those of us who are comfortable being out as parents of transgender must find ways to reach other parents, because so many parents tell us that they felt for so long they were the only ones in the world, they had the only freak in the world, and that they couldn't stop crying and so forth. So we want to reach those people and let them know that your children are wonderful just the way they are, and that you simply need to learn more about this complicated condition called transgender or transsexualism, and you will find that you still have a wonderful, loving child, although in a slightly new form.
I'm Paul Beeman. I'm a United Methodist minister and national president of PFLAG. When PFLAG was first born, it was designed for gay and lesbian. That's all we knew about back then. That's who the other group was. Slowly we learned about bisexuals and then about the transgendered, and it's just incumbent on an organization like ours to be open and inclusive and to include all God's children. I've spent my life with the Bible, and I think the primary message of the Bible is love and inclusion, and not, goodness knows, not judgment. PFLAG is designed to be open, and I don't know what groups are coming up next. Intersex movement, what's on down the road? I have no idea. But we are an organization that is committed to welcoming, open acceptance, but a whole lot more than that. I like the Southern Poverty Law Center and their emphasis on tolerance. But that's not enough for me, and it's not enough for PFLAG. We're committed to move beyond tolerance to celebration, to welcoming all people, and in fact, I want to move beyond having to simply celebrate everybody and say, we're all the same. We're one family. We're one people. I hope you're a part of that.
There's something in my heart that brings me here to be with you. Something so deep inside that tells me that my place is here. Too long I thought myself, my mind was so confused, until I taught myself thine own self be true. There's something in your heart that brings you